Hey guys, tonight we're heading deep into the misty mountain trails of ancient China, where the air smells like damp moss, campfire smoke, and faintly of boiled leaves. You're standing at the edge of a trail carved into a hillside, and in your hands, you're not holding coins, or jewels, or even gold, but a tightly packed, slightly musty brick of tea. Yes, actual tea. Compressed, molded, and stamped with official seals. And tonight, you're going to spend the next 2 hours discovering how something you'd normally steep in hot water once doubled as hard currency. You're probably thinking, surely they didn't buy horses with this stuff. But oh, they did. They bought horses, paid taxes, settled debts, and bribed officials who clearly had a taste for more than just power. And don't worry, we're not going to make you memorize dynasties or dates. Instead, you'll glide across centuries like a feather in a teacup, through emperors, caravans, revolts, and one oddly passionate monk with a lot of opinions on fermentation. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're still awake in the next 5 minutes, tell me where you're tuning in from and what time it is by your clock. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It starts quietly, as most long tales do. You're in southern China, sometime around the Han Dynasty, though no one's calling it that just yet. Local farmers are harvesting Camellia sinensis leaves, what we now call tea, and drying them under slanted woven rooftops. There's a rhythm to it, a lazy harmony of people who've already been drinking tea for centuries. But at this point, it's not currency. Not yet. Just a calming herbal beverage, probably overboiled and a little bitter. Now imagine you're a merchant, say, somewhere in Sichuan. You've been paid in copper coins all your life, but they're bulky, heavy, and for some reason, they keep disappearing between cracks in your ox cart. One day, someone hands you a brick of tea, tightly packed, easier to stack, and much more appreciated by everyone from border guards to your grandma. It smells like dry forest floor and civilization. By the time the 6th century rolls around, tea has already made the leap from leaf to pressed brick. Monasteries are helping lead the charge. Of course they are, because who else would have the time, patience, and unending supply of silence required to refine a fermentation method? You'd be surprised how many revolutions start with monks and long afternoons. The bricks themselves are a thing of beauty, rectangular, embossed with seals or imperial emblems, dense as hardwood, sometimes laced with herbs or rice flour, and sometimes, well, let's just say quality control wasn't always a strong point. You bite into a bad batch, and it tastes more like broom handle than brew. Still, these bricks spread fast. They're portable, stackable, tradable, and here's the kicker: you can break off what you need. A little wedge to pay for noodles, a whole slab for a horse, or a bribe, if the official you're dealing with prefers something that smells like honesty steeped in tradition. By the 8th century, under the ever-watchful Tang Dynasty, tea bricks begin to take on a semi-official status. You're starting to hear things like acceptable tender in border towns, and your local tax collector has a new collection box that smells suspiciously like smoked oolong. And while historians still argue whether it was the monks, merchants, or mid-level bureaucrats who really kick-started the currency status, one thing's certain somewhere along the line: people started trusting tea more than the actual coinage, probably because you couldn't melt it down or shave the edges. Plus, worst case, you drank your losses. But it wasn't all smooth sipping. There's already some friction bubbling under the surface. You've got coin purists who scoff at the idea of boilable money. Then there are smugglers, trying to sneak forged bricks. Yes, even tea had counterfeits. And let's not forget the ever-growing problem of mold, because storing bricks in humid huts for months is exactly as gross as it sounds. And yet, this weird, crumbly currency persists. You're now standing in a tea house, low ceiling, thick beams, and lanterns casting orange halos on worn wooden tables. A traveler sets down his coin purse, but the innkeeper eyes the tea brick in his other hand. A nod passes between them. No words, just understanding. Because at this point in history, tea isn't just valuable, it's respected. One fringe tale you'll hear around these parts is of a local governor who demanded all officials be paid in tea for a year, not out of economy, but spite. Apparently, the imperial mint had shorted his last shipment of coins, so he sent back a wagon full of pu-erh with a note that read, "This won't rust, petty, but poetic." By now, tea is traveling, overland, downriver, through mountain passes and into places where coins have no meaning. You pass merchants wearing furs and speaking dialects you don't recognize. Their coin, it crumbles when it gets wet, but they'll take a bite and nod approvingly. You're starting to realize the absurd genius of this system. It's not just that tea was popular, it was practical. You could pay a soldier, or a shaman, or a ship captain, and if no one would take it, you just make a pot and make friends. The wildest part, it worked for centuries, until the empires grew hungrier, and the bureaucrats started sniffing around for something they could tax more aggressively. But that's a storm for another section. For now, just let your mind steep in this strange, comforting paradox. The world's calmest drink once powered empires, fueled economies, and paid for wars. All in a brick you could carry in your coat. You wake, figuratively, somewhere along the slippery path of a rain-slicked mountain trail. It's centuries after those first quiet tea swaps, and now tea bricks are everywhere. They're being stacked in storerooms, tied to saddles, and packed into crates so tightly you can hear them creak like old bones. You're in a world where currency isn't clinking, it's thudding, heavy, earthy, fragrant. Banks, not quite yet, but these bricks are already acting like them. You're following a caravan heading north. Mules plod along under loads of compressed tea so dense they'd probably make decent roof tiles. The merchants are wrapped in wool, grumbling about the mud, but their voices soften every time they glance back at the cargo, because those aren't just bricks, they're trust. They're warmth in winter. They're the difference between a month's lodging or another night under the stars. Let's break down why this weird little system took root so effectively. See, unlike metal coins which corroded, disappeared into bandit hands, or got light from shifty minting practices, tea bricks were harder to fake. You couldn't just hammer out a tea coin in your shed. You needed leaves, labor, heat, and time, lots of time. And once formed, a brick was tough, not quite immortal, but durable enough to withstand travel across deserts, jungles, and the back pockets of drunk tax collectors. By the time you reach a border town, let's say Yunnan, since you like drama, you're watching this currency play out in real time. A soldier demands a toll. The merchant offers a wedge of brick. The soldier bites off a chunk, literally, because that's how you test the quality and nods. It's an exchange older than most buildings in the town. Here's your mainstream historical nugget by the late 700s. The Tang Dynasty is already regulating tea trade routes and encouraging tea roads not paved, of course, but marked paths just for the movement of this leafy gold. In fact, you can trace the growth of some southern cities directly to their tea traffic. Roads were carved not for armies, but for donkeys laden with bricks. But here's where it gets quirky. You meet a monk, yes, another one who insists the bricks must be prayed over before use. He's convinced the spirit of the tea blesses transactions. He even offers to chant while you make change. You politely decline and back away. But you wonder how many others bought into it. The real charm of this system isn't in its magic, though. It's in its utility. See, these bricks weren't all the same. Some were hard and aged, fermented for flavor and durability. Others were softer, fresher, more fragrant, but quicker to spoil. Traders learned to assess them like jewelers appraising gems. Color, compression, smell, even the sound of the break mattered. And in regions where the official coinage couldn't keep up with inflation or distance, tea bricks became the de facto standard. In Tibet, Mongolia, and the deeper recesses of Western China, you'd have a much easier time buying a yak with a tea brick than a sack of cash. Mostly because the yak herders didn't have much use for coins, but definitely appreciated a good brew. Now, Historians still argue whether this tea as currency practice ever officially replaced coinage, or whether it was just a shadow system tolerated by officials and loved by traders. But in practice, it worked. People took it, markets thrived, and governments, even the stingy ones, started taking notes. There were even tax rolls written entirely in bricks. Imagine an auditor pacing a dusty warehouse, counting bundles of pu-erh stacked 10 high, muttering about inconsistent labeling, bureaucratic bliss. But this also led to another little side industry: tea stamping. Certain provinces began branding their tea bricks with official seals to verify authenticity. The stamps were intricate, often pressed into the surface while the brick was still soft. Think of it as a very bitter passport. Some stamps even included imperial names, production regions, or quality ratings. Naturally, forgers soon followed. You come across a man offering triple-age mountain oolong bricks for half price. The brick smells, oddly, of hay and sadness. You pass. You're seeing a world evolve. Trade guilds are forming. Families specialize in particular brick shapes. Some are circular with a hole in the middle for carrying on a rope. Others are pressed into floral patterns. And then there's the ever-reliable rectangular slab, easy to pack, easy to stack, slightly less charming. And while all this is happening, tea is doing its other job: cultural unifier. It travels into homes, temples, forts, and markets. Soldiers drink it before battle. Elders sip it in judgment. Couples brew it before they marry. It's not just currency, it's communion, a shared ritual. One fringe belief that still floats around these parts is that the longer a tea brick travels, the wiser its flavor becomes. Some traders even claim their best bricks have been on the road for over a decade, which may be romantic nonsense, or possibly just a great excuse for lazy inventory rotation. But there's one thing no one argues about. Tea was power: soft, crumbly, drinkable power, and anyone who controlled the supply controlled the narrative. You pause on the trail and glance down at your feet. The mud's thick, but the footprints ahead are deep and steady. Merchants, monks, taxmen, and maybe even a few tea smugglers, all walking the same road, following the scent of slow-boiled history. By now, you're getting used to the scent: an earthy blend of dried leaves, faint smoke, and a hint of old wood from the crates stacked along every roadside. You've followed the trail long enough to see it transform, and now the world around you is steeped in a more structured kind of chaos. Welcome to the Tang Dynasty's legacy and the rise of imperial tea economics. A phrase that sounds boring because it absolutely is. But trust me, it gets weird. You're in a marketplace, late 700s, and there's a buzz in the air. Traders barter under canopies, scribes shuffle behind tax counters, and somewhere nearby, someone is playing a sad flute. It's all very cinematic, but your eyes are locked on a man carrying 3 tea bricks wrapped in twine, heading toward a ledger office with all the excitement of someone paying rent in old socks. Because now, in many regions, tea bricks aren't just informal currency. They're regulated tender, stamped and taxed like silver. See, the Tang rulers were nothing if not organized. And when they noticed people were using tea bricks more reliably than the empire's own coinage in remote areas, they didn't outlaw it, they monetized it. Of course they did. So they established tea taxes, collection centers, weigh stations, official molds. The state began controlling the flow of tea bricks, assigning values, and surprise, surprise, taking their share off the top. You're not just buying and selling now. You're part of a certified state economy. Hooray. But the implementation wasn't smooth. Out in rural provinces, people resisted the interference. Why should they let a distant capital tell them what their tea was worth? You sit at a roadside stall as an old trader mutters about new stamps and imperial nonsense. He pays with a brick anyway, but not without a theatrical eye roll. And here's your mainstream historical fact around this time. Lu Yu, the so-called sage of tea, is writing his famous Cha Jing, the classic of tea, documenting everything from ideal brewing temperatures to proper leaf processing. He's obsessed, like Don't talk to me until I weigh my water, obsessed. His book becomes the cornerstone of Chinese tea culture, and guess what? He's not a fan of brick tea. Lu Yu prefers loose leaf, clean water, and delicate infusions. To him, tea bricks are rustic, clunky, and way too common. So, while the government is turning bricks into banknotes, Lu is quietly judging the entire system from a bamboo hut. That's the scholarly tension of the age-refined tea versus practical tea, art versus economy. Historians still argue whether Lu Yu's influence ever actually slowed down the brick trade, or if his writing was more of a spiritual manifesto than an economic statement. Either way, the bricks won. Still, this is where things start getting weird. You wander into a town where the local governor has set a tea quota. Every family must contribute a set number of bricks annually. Failure means fines or forced labor. One poor family is literally boiling their own shoes, hoping the old hemp might count for something. It doesn't. And then there are the monks again. They've turned tea into an offering system, not just a drink, but a pathway to spiritual merit. You watch as one temple receives bricks like donations, stacking them into neat, fragrant altars. Some monks insist the bricks absorb blessings. Others dryly point out that they also absorb humidity and rats. You chuckle, but deep down, you feel the shift. Tea isn't just currency anymore. It's become a social force, a class marker, a spiritual token, and, yes, a deeply taxed commodity. One particularly quirky tidbit you come across is a village that developed a form of tea-counting songs, rhythmic chants sung by children as they counted incoming bricks during harvest season. A kind of sleepy fiscal nursery rhyme. You hum along as they sing about moldy leaves and generous landlords. It's adorable and depressingly economic. Another fringe tale floats your way, this one from a mountain outpost. Supposedly, a governor once demanded that all bricks be double-cooked to prevent counterfeits. The second bake hardened them beyond brewing. They became inedible but long-lasting, perfect for taxes, useless for tea. The locals started calling them tax stones. You wouldn't want to steep one. You find yourself marveling at the absurd brilliance of it all, how a lump of dried, fermented leaves became something you could trade for a cow, hide under your bed, or offer to the gods. You break off a corner of a brick and nibble it. It's bitter, chewy, and tastes faintly of bureaucracy. It's around this point that some regions start offering tea loans. A merchant lends a brick to a struggling farmer, who promises to repay in kind by next harvest. Interest is paid in brewed tea and labor. It's informal, word-based, and surprisingly functional. There are even old jokes scribbled on parchment. I owe you 3 bricks and 1 donkey, but I drank the proof and the donkey ran off. Let's call it even if you bring the cups. Classic. By the end of this section of the road, you're feeling it. The slow, creeping realization that humans will assign value to anything if it's stable, storable, and smells good with hot water. Tea bricks may seem bizarre to us now, but at the time, they were genius, fungible, fragrant, and most importantly, functional. You rest at a roadside inn, your bed nothing more than straw and dreams of licorice-scented wealth. Outside, a new shipment of bricks arrives. The innkeeper's eyes light up. Business is good, and the tea is strong. You're jolted awake not by a noise, but by a smell. Smoky, herbal, a little leathery. It's dawn in a high-altitude pass, and you're wrapped in an itchy wool blanket inside a stone-walled outpost somewhere along the Tea Horse Road. That's right. Tonight you're walking the most scenic currency exchange program in history, where bricks of tea go in and muscular Tibetan horses come out. You stretch, your breath clouding the chilly morning air. Outside, caravans creak to life, mules groan, yaks snort, and traders shuffle their boots through the frost as they ready bundles of compressed tea for one of the strangest economic dances East Asia ever invented. This is the tea horse trade, and you're watching it happen in real time. Here's the setup. China needs horses, big, shaggy, cold-tolerant horses that can survive on mountain grass and carry a warrior into battle without collapsing from dramatic overexertion. Tibet has those horses, lots of them. And Tibet, well, Tibet wants tea. Not just for sipping, though, they do plenty of that, but also for ceremonial use, religious offerings, and keeping the yak butter from dominating every meal. So, what happens? The two civilizations start bartering, regularly, across treacherous terrain and terrifying weather. You're walking alongside men whose job is to carry tea bricks across snow passes that make your knees ache just looking at them. And what do they get at the end of it? A handful of horses in the distinct honor of possibly not falling off a cliff that year. The route is no joke. This isn't a walk-the-dog kind of trail. It winds through steep rock corridors, rope bridges, and avalanche zones that don't care what dynasty you're from. But the tea must flow. Now for the mainstream history piece, the Tea Horse Road, Chamagudao, as it's still called, became an official trade route under the Tang Dynasty, but likely started centuries earlier. Records from as early as the Tang suggest regional governors were already organizing exchanges, setting quotas, and arguing endlessly about whose tea was more authentic. Classic bureaucrats. The state began sending agents to inspect tea bricks before the journey. Yes, your favorite drink had government-quality inspectors. If it didn't meet standard too soft, too moist, smelled like last week's boots, it wouldn't be allowed on the trail. You imagine a man in robes sniffing a brick like it's a wine tasting. Notes of moss, hint of horse sweat, approved. But here's where it gets beautifully chaotic. The ratio was never fixed. Sometimes it was 20 tea bricks for one horse, sometimes 80, depends on the season, the market, the level of horse sass that year. Historians still argue whether the imbalance ever caused conflict, or if it was just accepted as a strange fact of mountainous life. And then there's the paperwork. Oh, the paperwork. You're in a small stone office near the border. It's dim, cluttered, and smells like yak butter and damp scrolls. A scribe is recording today's trade. His inkwell freezes between each stroke. His face is the universal expression for, I'm underpaid. He records 400 bricks received, 6 horses sent. Next. Quirky detail time. Some regions use bricks of different flavors for different trades. Darker, more fermented bricks were favored in the colder Tibetan plateaus, while lighter ones were kept for domestic markets. Rumor has it, one governor even scented his bricks with jasmine to entice premium horses, though scholars question whether jasmine really works as equine currency. And yes, some traders use decoy bricks, pressed bundles filled with sawdust, or dried weeds, disguised with high-quality outer leaves. It wasn't common, but it happened. There's even a folktale about a caravan leader who swapped fake bricks, got caught, and was made to eat the entire shipment as punishment, including the twine. Now, you're resting at a cliffside tea house built for travelers like you, cold, sore, and deeply aware that tea might be the only reason this road even exists. You sip a steaming cup made from yesterday's brick, and it's intense, smoky, oily, a little sour. But after a day on the trail, it tastes like comfort. The locals brew it thick, mix it with butter and salt, and call it sustenance. You watch a young herder pour half a cup into his boot to warm his foot. Resourceful, gross, effective. This is where you realize something important. This wasn't just about economics. It was about connection. These bricks were more than currency. They were cultural ambassadors. In exchange for horses, China sent warmth, ritual, and a piece of daily life. In return, Tibet offered transportation, strength, and a stubborn independence that no dynasty ever truly conquered. There's an eerie beauty to this system. You're high above the clouds, breathing thin air, sipping thick tea, and watching the gears of an ancient barter system grind forward one hoof step at a time, a network built not on gold, but on trust, repetition, and an uncomfortable number of blisters. Some nights, storms hit the pass and caravans disappear. Some bricks never make it, but the trade continues, because it has to, Because without those horses, China's border defenses suffer, and without the tea, Tibetan rituals falter. It's an odd marriage, but a lasting one. And every morning, the process begins again. Bricks packed, saddles tightened, scrolls signed, one more round of sipping and swapping across the sky. By the time you fall asleep in your creaky bunk, you've memorized the rhythm load: walk, barter, boil, repeat. And in that rhythm, somehow, an entire economy rides. You're not sure what wakes you first, the faint sound of camel bells in the distance or the very modern realization that Marco Polo never actually mentioned tea in his travels through China. Weird, right? You shuffle your dream self forward across the dusty roads of the Yuan Dynasty, which is basically the Mongol Empire's sprawling side hustle. And tonight, you'll sip through one of history's most fascinating contradictions: how tea became more widespread than ever, even as the guy who should have written about it didn't. The Mongols are in charge now, and if there's one thing you've learned, it's that when the Mongols move in, everything gets turned up a notch: trade routes, taxes, and the sheer velocity of goods moving across the continent. It's the Silk Road on double espresso. Horses gallop faster, guards get stricter, and tea travels further than ever before. Under the Yuan, the Mongol court adopts many Chinese customs bureaucracy, currency systems, noodles, and yes, tea drinking. Not everyone's thrilled about that. You're sitting near a court official grumbling that real Mongols drink mare's milk, not boiled leaves, but even he accepts a steaming cup after his voice cracks from yelling too much about taxes. Here's your mainstream fact. During the Yuan Dynasty 1271–1368, tea becomes a massive government-controlled commodity. It's traded, taxed, and sometimes rationed, especially during wartime. The court uses tea bricks not just for diplomacy, but for feeding border troops. Imagine being paid in chewable caffeine. But there's a twist. Despite tea's growing presence across the empire, it's almost entirely absent from Marco Polo's writings. Historians still argue whether that's because he found it unremarkable, missed it entirely, or, conspiracy alert, never visited China at all. Yes, that debate exists, and yes, it's fueled by just the right amount of academic sass. Now, picture this. You're resting under a camel skin tent in western China. Traders from Persia, Central Asia, and India are sipping thick, spiced tea made from the same bricks you saw back in Sichuan. The bricks are stamped with Chinese characters, faded from long journeys, but still fragrant. They've crossed deserts, dodged bandits, and survived camel burps to get here. Tea is now part of a much bigger system. It's traded for spices, pearls, fabrics, even exotic animals. In one market, you watch a brick of dark pu-erh exchanged for a shipment of dyed peacock feathers. The tea merchant sniffs the feathers suspiciously before nodding. Deal. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some Mongol tribes began mixing brick tea with curdled milk and dried mutton fat, a blend that would kill your average Starbucks customer, but apparently hits the spot at 10,000 feet in a windstorm. They believed it warmed the body, soothed the stomach, and prevented colds. No one dared question the logic, especially not the guy chewing on a frozen goat knuckle. The Yuan's postal relay system becomes key to moving these bricks faster and further. Caravans deliver official tea shipments with stamped papers and military escorts. There are even reports of tea-only routes, paths less known to common travelers, where the government's leafy gold moves with surprising urgency. You pass one such caravan now, silent riders, bundled in fur, leading mules with saddle packs wrapped in oilcloth. The air smells like pine smoke and impending snow. They don't speak, but they nod. Fellow travelers on the Empire's caffeine circuit. The tea bricks themselves evolve too. Some are embossed with imperial crests. Others carry stylized Mongol script alongside Chinese characters. You handle one like it's a relic. It's dense, dark, and oddly warm to the touch. Your guide says it was baked twice, then aged underground for a year. You pretend to know what that means. Meanwhile, back in the capital Dadu, which later becomes Beijing, tea is pouring into banquets. court ceremonies, and medical clinics. Doctors prescribe it for everything from headaches to melancholy. One scroll even claims it can soothe the spleen. You're not sure where your spleen is, but it appreciates the gesture. Still, not everyone's a fan. In the outer provinces, resentment brews. The government's tight grip on tea production, especially in regions like Fujian and Yunnan, means local farmers see less profit and more paperwork. There's a rising tension between those who grow the tea and those who own it. One local joke you overhear: the emperor drinks tea for his nerves. I drink it for my debt. Sharp. You come across a border checkpoint. A caravan's being inspected. A soldier sniffs a brick and slices it open with a curved blade to check for contraband. A few smugglers had started hollowing out bricks and hiding silver, opium, even messages. The sliced brick smells like cloves and ink. Clean. The soldier shrugs. Next. And here's where the history takes a soft turn. You meet a Mongol noblewoman brewing tea for her children. She prefers the softer bricks, the kind that crumble easily in boiling water. She explains, between spoonfuls, that she was raised on horse milk but switched to tea after visiting Dadu. She swears it makes her more patient. You believe her? As the Yuan dynasty rolls forward, the tea brick becomes a quiet symbol of how much the empire has changed. What was once a fringe currency is now woven into daily life, from palace halls to prairie yurts. The act of boiling, breaking, and sipping these dark, fragrant slabs has become a shared ritual. You sit under the stars with a chipped clay cup, warm steam rising against the cold night. A passing trader tells you a story about a haunted tea brick that once whispered imperial secrets when dunked in spring water. You laugh, but keep your cup close, just in case. In a world as wide as this, anything seems possible, even a future where bricks made from leaves outlast the dynasties that minted them. You roll your shoulders, loosen your boots, and take a deep breath of humid southern air. The Mongols are long gone now, and the dynasty has changed hands again, because of course it has. Welcome to the Ming Dynasty, where emperors are suspicious, bureaucrats are bloated, and brick tea, well, it's about to have a bit of a rebellion on its hands. You're in a tea house now, but it's no ordinary roadside rest stop. This one's sleek, polished wood beams, jade-inlaid tables, and porcelain cups so thin you can hear your own doubts echo inside them. Across the room, a scholar in flowing robes grimaces as he watches the server prepare his tea, not with bricks. Oh no, but with loose leaves, fresh, fragile, elegant. Yes, you're now in the era of tea snobbery. The Ming elite are turning up their noses at bricks. To them, compressed tea is clunky, impure, and worse common. The court has begun favoring loose-leaf green teas, brewed with delicate care and served in glass or porcelain. If brick tea is a burlap sack, loose-leaf is a silk glove. And like all great cultural divides, this one gets petty fast. Your mainstream historical moment. In 1391, the Hongwu emperor banned the production of tea bricks as official tribute to the court. He preferred loose-leaf teas and believed brick production was wasteful and corrupted by greedy officials, which, in fairness, it absolutely was. You can practically hear the grumbling of every tax inspector who suddenly had to switch from counting bricks to measuring leaves. But don't be fooled, brick tea doesn't die here. It just changes lanes. While the court's sipping spring-picked green tea from snail-shell-shaped cups, the borderlands and trade routes double down on bricks. You're on a dusty road now, watching a merchant load bricks stamped with official government seals. They're heading to Tibet, Mongolia, and beyond, where nobody cares about floral aroma, they just want something that won't rot in a backpack. This dual tea economy splits the empire. In the center, prestige, aesthetics, and paper-thin ceramic. On the fringes, portability, durability, and bricks you can literally build a fire with if things go badly. Historians still argue whether this division helps stabilize trade or deepen class divides. Either way, you now live in a world where the kind of tea you drink says everything about your social rank. Here comes your quirky moment. Some rogue tea producers trying to bridge the gap start embedding actual poetry into their tea bricks. Little pressed messages, haikus, even government warnings like beware of counterfeiters or drink honorably. One famously eccentric brick bore the line. This is not a bribe. It was used as a bribe. You chuckle, sip your cup, and move on. Out in the provinces, brick tea continues to thrive, not just because of habit, but because of necessity. You sit by a campfire with a border guard who explains that one brick keeps better in winter than 10 sacks of rice. He breaks a piece off with a knife, boils it in yak milk, and swears it prevents frostbite. You don't believe him, but you drink it anyway. It tastes like charcoal and comfort. Meanwhile, in towns near tea-producing regions, local governments are reinstating some controls. They demand that bricks be baked longer, stored better, taxed harder. Inspectors make surprise visits. A single wormhole in a brick could now trigger an entire shipment's rejection. This is bureaucratic paranoia at its most caffeinated. And the forgers, they adapt. Some begin mixing twigs, rice husks, even goat hair into their fakes. One infamous gang was caught compressing old shoe leather and spraying it with tea oil. Legend says a monk took a sip, closed his eyes, and just whispered, "Why?" You find one of these imitation bricks at a flea market. It smells like regret and pine cleaner. You decline. Now here's something beautiful in the mountains of Sichuan. A monastery still stamps its bricks by hand. You visit, watch, listen. The monks say the pressing process seals in the truth. You're not sure what that means, but the resulting brew is deep, dark, and tastes like 1,000 rainy days all in one cup. By the late Ming period, certain provinces developed tea currency guides, ledgers assigning exact values to tea bricks based on weight, age, region, and appearance. One brick might be worth half a bolt of silk, another, a good saddle. It's an unofficial stock market where liquidity depends on literally being able to make liquid. You overhear a heated debate in a tavern. Pu-erh from last season is more stable than copper coins. One man insists. His opponent, red-faced, shouts. That's because your copper coins are fake. A scuffle breaks out. Someone throws a brick, not metaphorically, literally. The Ming bureaucracy, not wanting to miss out, reasserts control over trade routes, especially in border areas. Guards patrol checkpoints, records are triple logged, the punishment for tax evasion. A month's labor and possibly being forced to drink inferior tea. That last part might be a joke, but the fear is real. Still, the people find a way. They always do. In villages, a new tradition emerges. The brick break, a ceremonial moment when a family opens their prized tea brick during weddings or festivals. Everyone gets a cup. Everyone drinks. It's not just about flavor, it's about memory. You sip from one such communal pot now. The tea is dark, slightly bitter, but smooth. You feel a connection across time, across class, across dynasties, all from a clump of leaves pressed and carried across centuries. As the coals die down and laughter fades into yawns, you rest beside the hearth. A monk hums a lullaby about tea that travels farther than soldiers, speaks more kindly than coins, and never forgets the hands that made it. And you believe him. You're up early again, dawn mist curling around your ankles as you wade through a marshy lowland where tax collectors wear more armor than farmers, and everyone seems to speak in ledgers. Welcome to the part of tea's history where things get suspiciously tangled in salt, corruption, and some impressively creative accounting. This is the salt tax conspiracy. And while it might sound like something your paranoid uncle dreamed up after too much jasmine tea, it was very real and very lucrative. You enter a government outpost that smells like wet parchment, boiled boots, and the faint bitterness of unbrewed bricks. There's a tax inspector hunched over a massive wooden abacus, sweating harder than the cook next door. He's not counting coins, he's counting tea. Because here, tea isn't just currency. It's leverage, it's loophole, and it's become deeply entangled with China's salt monopoly. that other pungent pillar of imperial revenue. Here's your mainstream moment. During the Ming and early Qing dynasties, the salt tax was one of the empire's most important sources of income. The government controlled production and distribution down to the grain, but out in remote provinces where silver was scarce, coinage unreliable, and tea bricks abundant, officials often accepted tea as payment. Convenient. Yes, official. Not always. What began as a practical workaround slowly evolved into an entire shadow economy. You eavesdrop on a tea trader and a local magistrate whispering behind a screen door. The trader offers 6 bricks good, aged pu-erh from Yunnan. The magistrate nods but doesn't write anything down. Instead, he motions toward a side room. Inside, salt vouchers, stamped, pre-approved. It's not bribery, exactly. It's administrative flexibility. You sip your tea and pretend not to notice. Historians still debate how widespread this informal bartering was. Some argue it kept frontier economies stable. Others say it opened the floodgates to corruption, fraud, and more than a few missing caravans. But one thing's clear, when 2 of history's tastiest commodities started overlapping, the paperwork got spicy. One especially quirky tale comes from a river town, where a tax clerk accidentally recorded a shipment of brick salt instead of tea bricks. When questioned, he insisted it was a local product, a delicacy made by drying salt in hollowed tea bricks. Totally fake, of course. But the excuse worked, for 3 years. You smirk, passing a group of mule handlers who brag about hiding salt vouchers inside tea bricks, hollowed, re-glued, hidden beneath layers of fermented leaf, a salty fortune inside a bitter shell. They call them double flavor bombs. Naturally, someone tried to brew one. It did not end well. The deeper you go into the bureaucratic tangle, the more absurd it gets. Some regions develop parallel ledgers, one for coins, another for tea, a third for miscellaneous. Guess where the most creative entries land? You glance at one record listing 4 aged bricks, 2 salted mules, 1 emotional agreement. You don't ask. It's not all sneaky, though. In some places, governors openly encourage tea for salt exchange to avoid price volatility. One particularly forward-thinking official, Chen Liang, established a fixed brick-to-salt ratio. His province thrived. Unfortunately, so did local smugglers who forged his stamp on bricks and flooded neighboring markets. The experiment ended in flames. Literally, they burned his office down. You cross paths with an inspector hauling a satchel full of verification samples, half tea, half salt, all suspicion. He lets you sniff one. You nod politely and keep walking before he asks too many questions. Here's a sensory moment. You enter a storehouse filled to the rafters with bricks. Dust hangs in the air like fog. Some bricks are fresh, soft at the edges. Others are rock hard, wrapped in oilcloth and tagged with silk ribbons. Each one tells a story: a tax dodge, a wedding dowry, a funeral gift, a bribe, a loan, a favor repaid with fragrance. And yet, no matter how crooked the trail, the value remains. You watch a border official accept 3 bricks in exchange for a travel permit. He doesn't even glance at the salt tokens offered alongside. He just breaks off a corner, chews it thoughtfully, and waves the caravan through. There's a fringe theory floating among tea scholars that the growing use of tea and salt trade actually prolonged brick tea's lifespan as a currency. It gave the bricks a new purpose even as the central court tried to phase them out in favor of silver and copper. Like an old actor taking on a supporting role, brick tea refused to leave the stage. And then there's the matter of storage. Salt needs to stay dry. Tea needs to breathe. Yet both end up in the same warehouses, the same caravan packs, sometimes even the same crates. Mistakes happen. A storm hits. The lines blur. You find a brick of tea that tastes faintly briny. Not bad, honestly. At night, around the fire, traders joke about starting a 3rd currency: salted tea. Durable, drinkable, and mildly addictive. One man swears he'll patent the recipe. Another throws his cup at him. Business as usual. And so, the conspiracy goes on not in smoke-filled back rooms, but in broad daylight, one brick at a time, a system of quiet agreements and public silences. Not quite legal, not quite criminal, but entirely functional. You drift off to the sound of scribes tallying invisible numbers, quills scratching in tandem with teapots bubbling over low flames. Somewhere, a mule snorts, someone sings an old tea-counting song. And behind it all, the unspoken truth in this corner of the empire, flavor moves faster than law. You're back on the trail now, the kind where the dust clings to your ankles and the only thing drier than the road ahead is the tea brick in your saddlebag. By this point in your journey, you've seen tea exchanged for horses, taxes, and even forgiveness. But now, you're walking into the heart of an age-old debate, tea versus silver. Which one really held more value, and which would you rather have in your pocket when winter rolled in and the border market froze over? It's the late Ming period slipping into early Qing, and the economic climate is complicated. China's trade with Europe is exploding. Spanish silver from the Americas is pouring in via Manila, creating new waves in China's coin-based economy. But in the mountainous hinterlands, far from imperial mints and polished merchants, silver is about as useful as a wet matchstick. Out here, tea is king. Let's set the scene. You're standing in a trade market in the border town of Kongding, perched high in Sichuan, just east of the Tibetan Plateau. The wind smells like yak butter and cold stone. Traders from every direction crowd the square, arguing over everything from the age of bricks to the authenticity of coinage. One man waves a string of Spanish silver coins, the pieces of 8, while another calmly unwraps a tea brick from oiled leather. The crowd flocks to the tea. A mainstream fact incoming. Despite the global influx of silver during the 16th and 17th centuries, in remote regions of China, tea bricks remained far more functional as everyday currency. You couldn't shave off tiny slivers of tea to cheat someone. You couldn't mint fakes from tin. And crucially, you could drink it if things went sideways. So now, a debate brews, pun entirely intended. In wealthier cities like Hangzhou and Suzhou, silver is becoming standard. Imperial edicts are pushing for silver-based taxation. But border zones, they're not convinced. One governor's report from Yunnan flatly stated, "When the cold comes, the coin buys nothing. The tea lights the fire and warms the belly." You sit beside a merchant from Lhasa, trading stories over hot, greasy tea poured from a dented kettle. He tells you he's seen more fights break out over fake silver than bad tea, and he trusts tea bricks more because, quote, "You can't drink silver to stay alive on the pass." Fair. The fringe tales come thick now. One band of mountain traders swore by a secret tea bank buried deep in a cave system. Each brick was wrapped in wax silk and marked with clan symbols. They'd leave or take bricks based on an honor system that lasted 4 generations until someone's goat found the stash and ate 2 bricks, sparking a minor war. You chuckle, but the point stands. Tea had intrinsic survival-level value. Silver didn't. That said, some officials tried to formalize the exchange. They set rates 1 silver tael equals 10 bricks of first-grade pu-erh. Problem is, quality varied wildly, and silver weights weren't consistent. The result? More arguments, more scuffles. One tax office was reportedly burned to the ground over a dispute involving underweighted silver and moldy brick lies. Historians still argue whether these TV's silver systems represented parallel economies or one fractured whole. Some say they coexisted peacefully, adapting to region and season. Others believe the tension between them fueled corruption, rebellion, and even shifts in border policy. You pass a camp where smugglers lounge by a fire. One holds a pouch of silver, another tosses a tea brick back and forth like a stone. They are debating which would buy more safe passage or silence. Eventually, they settle on tea, as always. And here's your quirky moment. A tiny village near the Mekong used tea bricks as dowry for generations. Not cows, not coins, bricks. Compressed, fragrant, often sealed with beeswax and stored in wedding chests for years. The older the brick, the more prestigious the union. One couple famously brewed theirs on their 30th anniversary. The guests described the flavor as reminiscent of dust, but in a good way. By now, you're seeing how regional needs shaped value. In humid southern provinces, tea spoiled faster, silver was king. In the dry northern steppes, tea lasted, brewed easily, and was often safer than water. Value was climate-based, practical, personal. You stop by a lone hut on the outskirts of a caravan, rest stop. The old man living there accepts no coins, only tea. He boils a pot for every visitor, listens to their stories, and in return, offers advice, shelter. And once, according to a fading legend, he predicted a flood after sniffing a particularly pungent brick. True, probably not. Memorable, definitely. As evening falls, you warm your hands around a chipped mug. The tea inside is bitter, fermented, and earthy. It tastes like patience and barter. A coin might get you further in the city, but here, in the highlands, with wolves howling in the distance and frost biting your boots, a tea brick might just save your life. You look into the flames and realize something profound. Currency isn't about value. It's about trust, faith, belief that when you hand something over, the world gives something back. And for these people, for this land, that faith still comes wrapped in cloth, stamped in characters, and steeped in centuries. You're not walking anymore, you're riding, bundled in wool, perched atop a wide, shaggy horse that smells like smoke and stubbornness. The air is thin, the wind bites, and somewhere on the horizon, another day of barter waits. Welcome to the steppe, where silver is rare, and your most reliable currency can be boiled into breakfast. That's right, you're now trading alongside nomads, where tea you can sip is tea you can spend. It's the 17th century, give or take a few winters. You're traveling with a caravan through the rolling plains of Inner Asia, open skies, endless grass, and people who've mastered survival in ways that make urban life feel laughably over-designed. There are no ATMs here, no coin changers, and definitely no Venmo. What they do have bricks of tea sturdy, flavorful, and way easier to carry than a purse full of jangly metal. You pause with a group of herders by a half-frozen stream. They unwrap a brick of tea like it's a sacred text. One of them slices off a chunk with a flint blade, tosses it into a pot with yak butter, salt, and a pinch of dried goat cheese. You take a sip. It tastes like energy, like calories, like wealth with a creamy aftertaste. Here's your mainstream moment by this point in history. Brick tea had become the primary medium of exchange in large swaths of Tibet, Mongolia, and parts of Central Asia, especially in remote settlements and nomadic communities. It was preferred over Chinese coinage or foreign silver because of its portability, storability, and critically its function as food. Tea wasn't just barter, it was part of the diet. You could live off it for weeks if you had to. You could feed it to guests, offer it at funerals, or pay a healer in bricks and be seen as generous. There were reports of entire communities using nothing but tea bricks for local exchange. It wasn't a fringe economy, it was the economy. And it wasn't just practicality. There was something ritualistic to it. The bricks were unwrapped like treasure, shared with ceremony, stored with reverence. A family's good bricks aged, fragrant, dark were kept hidden until a wedding, a birth, or a winter desperate enough to justify opening the precious stash. Now, some of these bricks were monstrous. A full-sized, trade-grade tea brick could weigh up to 5 pounds. You wouldn't exactly carry it in your pocket, but you could break off pieces, almost like currency in denominations. 1 chunk for a rope, 2 chunks for a blanket, half a brick for a trained dog. It sounds absurd until you see it in action. Here comes your quirky tidbit. Some nomadic tribes carved their family crest or personal symbol into their bricks before travel. It helped track ownership. It also prevented mix-ups during trades, especially in camp gatherings where everyone's bricks looked alike. One famous merchant carried bricks shaped like turtles, claiming they brought luck and brewed slower. His nickname, Shell Cup, obviously. Meanwhile, horses ever the measuring stick of value were routinely bought and sold in tea bricks. You overhear a casual trade 8 bricks for a mare, 9 if she's pregnant. A foal might go for 4. An old, tired gelding, maybe 1 brick and some flattery. And yes, tea rustlers existed, smugglers who intercepted caravans, stole bricks, and sold them in rival markets. Sometimes, the bricks were split in half and repackaged to hide imperial stamps. One rogue operation was caught melting outer layers of high-quality bricks and pressing them around sawdust cores. The scandal became known as the Fake Leaf Affair, still whispered about today, mostly with laughter. You ask a herder how they store their wealth. He grins, pulls back a rug in his yurt, and shows you a floor pit lined with bricks, sealed in dried animal hide. It's his family bank vault. Moisture's the enemy, he says. So is theft. He feeds visitors terrible tea on purpose to keep them from asking questions. Now, historians still argue whether this tea-based nomadic economy was a sign of independence from central Chinese control or just an adaptation to the harsh geography. Some say it was necessity. Others see it as quiet rebellion. After all, you can't tax what never reaches a register. The border officials certainly tried. Some Tang Dynasty outposts established tea conversion posts, where bricks could be officially exchanged for coin equivalents. Of course, the rates were terrible. Locals kept their bricks. The posts were abandoned. One ended up as a goat shelter. But the real joy of this system wasn't its defiance. It was its elegant simplicity. You carried your currency, you cooked with it, you gave it as a gift. If you trusted someone, you split a brick with them. If you didn't, you moved on. It wasn't just transactional, it was relational. As the sun sets, you sit around a fire listening to a slow, droning song about a trader who rode 300 miles with nothing but tea and luck. The fire crackles, your tea steams, and your mind drifts with the smoke, up into the stars that blanket the steppe. There are no coins in your pack, no gold in your hand, but the brick by your side. That's enough. You're walking now, slowly, through the jagged passes of the Sichuan-Tibet border, wind cutting sideways, the path a slushy, half-frozen mess of hoofprints and shattered dreams. And tonight, you're not just walking through trade routes, you're stepping into the darker, dustier side of tea's economic history, the era of smugglers, tea rustlers, and brick bandits. It's late Qing Dynasty, and while the emperors are still issuing edicts in Beijing about tariffs and tribute, out here where the mountains breathe mist and the passes eat mules, the real game is being played by desperate men with sharp knives and better knowledge of the terrain than any tax officer will ever have. Let's begin with something mainstream. By the 18th century, brick tea had become so valuable in borderland trade that entire smuggling networks evolved around it, complex, organized, and often more efficient than the official tea routes. These weren't just a few sneaky monks hiding bricks in their robes. This was full-blown caravan heists, black market brick presses, and traveling gangs who specialized in one very particular crime: tea theft. You're camped in a ravine with a merchant caravan tonight. The guards are jumpy. One of them hasn't slept in 2 nights. Why? Because just last week, a shipment of over 200 bricks disappeared near the bend in the path they call Donkey's Drop. The only clue left behind: 3 sets of hoofprints going in, none coming out, either magic or mules with loyalty issues. Here's a fun fringe tale. One infamous tea bandit named Guy the Goat reportedly dressed his gang in sheepskin cloaks, disguised their mules with white chalk, and raided caravans at dawn under a dense fog. They'd sneak up bleating like mountain goats, then draw swords the moment guards dropped their guard. Historians still debate whether Gui actually existed, but the legend was strong enough to make some merchants refuse to travel in fog for decades. As you stir your tea with a stick, one of the guards mutters a saying, "A blade splits faster than a brick breaks." You don't ask him what it means. You just sip and glance over your shoulder. At the core of this lawless tension is something very simple: value plus isolation equals opportunity. Tea bricks were valuable, portable, and abundant on dangerous, unmapped trails. What better target for people who knew the paths, the rhythms, the blind spots of the patrols? Some smugglers got clever. You pass a trader who admits his bricks are fake. Not bad fake, just altered. Half-real tea, half-pressed leaves from wild weeds. Still boils. He shrugs. Still trades. You wonder who taught him to speak in riddles and fraud. Then there were the counterfeit stamps. Forged imperial seals pressed into soft bricks, made to look like they'd passed government inspection. These bricks were often sold fast and far, to buyers too remote to compare the smell or taste. By the time the deception was discovered, the seller was 3 provinces away with pockets full of real silver. Mainstream historians note that some local governments began issuing official brick registries ledgers to track production and distribution, complete with matching stamp books. But guess what? Those were forged, too. In fact, one historian wrote that for every rule issued in the capital, 5 new scams emerged in the mountains. You believe it. And the worst offenders weren't always brigands. Sometimes it was the officials themselves. You visit a border office that looks abandoned, but inside, records show that over 1,000 bricks vanished over 3 months. The tax collector retired early, built a house with heated floors. Curious. Your quirky tidbit tonight: a traveling theater troupe was caught smuggling tea bricks in hollowed stage props. The bricks were packed into fake dragon heads, bamboo stilts, and even inside a papier-mâché god of wealth. When questioned, the troupe insisted it was part of their act, the tale of the giving tea god, bold. Back on the trail, you walk with a caravan who swear by decoy bricks, hollow inside, filled with stones or dried dung. Smugglers would steal them, only to open them in fury days later. One caravan leader laughs as he tells you about a thief who returned the brick with a note: "Your tea smells like regret." You think about the irony, how something as calming and communal as tea could inspire so much violence and deceit. But then again, you're not carrying just a drink. You're carrying currency, commodity, culture. And when times are lean, people will risk everything for a brick they can boil. As dusk settles, your caravan circles the wagons. Guards post at 4 points. Fires crackle low. Someone plays a sad tune on a reed pipe, and the bricks are moved carefully, silently into a hidden compartment beneath the central cart. You watch the operation with admiration. It's more choreographed than any imperial parade. And then, over tea that tastes faintly of pine and caution, you hear the final story of the night: a man who once carried a brick forged from ashes burned tea leaves pressed with glue and tinted with ink. It looked real, smelled real, brewed like boiled parchment. But it fooled a high-ranking buyer. For a week, the forger lived like an emperor, then vanished. You ask the guard what happened to him. The guard shrugs. Some say he retired. Some say he was boiled. You decide not to press for clarification. You wake up to the sound of scratching quills and murmured numbers. Not bandits this time, bureaucrats. You're deep in the Tang Dynasty now, where the tea brick economy isn't wild and lawless anymore. It's, well, tamed, predictable, heavily recorded, painfully categorized. Welcome to the era of tea surveillance, where bricks are no longer just currency, they're inventory. You're standing in a government depot, one of dozens scattered across trade towns in western China. The building creaks with the weight of ledgers, stacked higher than the bricks themselves. The smell of aged paper mingles with dusty tea, ink, and because bureaucracy always attracts it, mild despair. This is the Tang Dynasty's tea control machine, and it runs on 3 things: stamps, taxes, and suspicion. Let's start with a mainstream truth. By the 18th and 19th centuries, the Qing administration had fully recognized tea bricks as not just a rural necessity, but an economic asset. Entire offices called tea and horse bureaus were set up to manage the trade. They didn't just count bricks. They monitored quality, storage, routes, and even the political reliability of the traders who handled them. You pass one such trader now. He's being interviewed, yes, interviewed before his bricks are allowed to leave town. The clerk asks if he's ever overboiled pu-erh, whether he's ever traded with border tribes not officially sanctioned, and how many bricks he's misplaced in the last 12 moons. The trader answers with practiced sighs. You sip your tea quietly. The system is robust. Bricks are now required to bear official stamps, sometimes double-sealed with wax or dyed string. Storage centers are audited, tax rates are adjusted quarterly, and border permits. Let's just say you're not crossing into Tibet with a backpack full of tea unless you've got enough paperwork to wallpaper your yurt. Still, there's beauty in the order. You walk past a storeroom where bricks are stacked like gold bars neatly labeled, color-coded, and sorted by grade. Some are over a decade old, wrapped in silk and bearing calligraphy so fine, it feels like a waste to drink them. Others are utilitarian dark, dense, and meant for trade caravans and cold mornings. Quirky detail time, one province, seeking to cut down on smuggling, introduced tea patrol dogs, trained to sniff out unstamped bricks. They were adorable, ineffective, and ultimately reassigned to guard duck farms. But for a brief moment, they were the fluffiest tax collectors in China. You now find yourself seated beside an aging inspector who invites you to taste test 2 bricks. One state-sanctioned. He says, the other's from the hills. You sip both. One is smooth, predictable, and slightly dry. The other, wild, smoky, vibrant. You raise an eyebrow. The inspector smiles. Thought so. This is the quiet tension in the late Qing era. The state wants control, but the hills want flavor. Independent brick producers continue to thrive in remote villages, passing recipes down generations, compressing leaves using traditional molds with symbols not registered on any imperial ledger, technically illegal, practically unstoppable. And so, the government adapts. They launch brick certification campaigns, offering rewards for traders who report rogue tea. Propaganda scrolls are distributed. Drink legal, trade loyal, brew prosperity. You spot one nailed to a tree and wonder how effective it is, probably about as much as a damp match in a thunderstorm. Historians still argue whether the Qing government's regulation stabilized the tea economy or just drove more people underground. One thing's certain, the paperwork got so extensive that officials began outsourcing ledger work to monks, who already had calligraphy skills and far more patience. At night, you visit one such monastery. Scrolls are stacked beside bricks. Monks alternate between prayers and tax forms. One hands you a bowl of tea and says, "Our leaves are more honest than most men." You're too tired to argue. You also learn about the 5-stamp rule, a regulation requiring bricks destined for export to bear 5 marks. One from the tea press, one from the tax office, one from the inspector, one from the local governor, and one from the shipping bureau. If any were missing, the brick was confiscated or, in some towns, ceremonially burned. A great tragedy and a great smell. Now here's the strange part. As tea regulation got tighter, the black market got fancier. Some counterfeiters began making fake stamps so beautiful that collectors now value them more than the tea. You visit a museum in Chengdu where a forged dragon bloom seal from 1822 is displayed in a glass case, alongside the dried-out brick it once authenticated. The caption reads, "Forgery so good, even the emperor kept one." You chuckle. But it's not all red ink and patrol dogs. Some reforms worked. Tea became more stable in price. Traders grew bolder, knowing the system, while slow, was at least consistent. A farmer could sell a brick in spring and still afford winter rice. That's no small thing. And there's a quiet dignity to the routine. Every stamped brick, every verified load, is a story in numbers, a contract of trust between maker and buyer. You realize that, under all the surveillance, the same simple truth remains. Tea moves people, tea connects villages, tea warms hands, tea builds trust. And if that means a few extra forms, a few extra dogs, and the occasional overcooked ledger clerk. Well, that's the price of progress. You settle in a government inn, the bed straw stuffed but dry. A stamped brick sits on the shelf beside you, fragrant, square, and oddly comforting. As your eyelids grow heavy, you realize it's not the taste, the value, or the paperwork that lingers. It's the feeling of continuity, something made by hands, passed through hands, and eventually, welcomed by yours. The snow crunches beneath the heavy feet of a camel, and suddenly you're in a different world, flatter, colder, and more Russian than anything you've felt so far. Welcome to the camel economy, where tea bricks cross thousands of miles into Siberia, and the air smells like pine sap and frostbite. This is the chapter of history that the samovar never saw coming. You're bundled in furs now, eyes squinting under the low winter sun. The Tang Dynasty is still very much in power, but the roads you're on aren't Chinese anymore. You've crossed into Russian territory, along the Great Tea Road, an overland route stretching from China's interior all the way to Moscow. And what's riding on the backs of these frost-covered, slow-plodding camels? Tea bricks, thousands of them. Mainstream history time, beginning in the late 17th century and peaking during the 18th and 19th centuries, brick tea became one of the most valuable commodities traded between Qing China and Tsarist Russia. The Russians adored it, couldn't get enough. Tea was shipped in compressed brick form from caravan hubs like Kyakhta, making its way through Siberia on camelback before finally landing in Russian markets in noble teacups. Now, you might wonder why not just use ships? Why the endless march of camels through forests and snow? Simple, tax evasion. Well, also because land routes were safer for certain goods and avoided the maritime stranglehold of European powers. But tax evasion really lit the fire. Overland trade was more discreet, more flexible, and once the treaties were signed, more profitable for both empires. The 1689 Treaty of Nershinsk, that was a tea treaty in disguise. You pass a checkpoint hut staffed by Russian customs officers. One of them sniffs a brick and scowls. "Too soft," he mutters. "Shoddy stuff. Must be from the southern batches." The Chinese trader shrugs. The stamp is real. The bribe is subtle. The camel grunts. Everyone moves on. Here's your quirky moment. Russians prefer dark, heavily fermented bricks, especially for their zavarka, a tea concentrate brewed strong enough to resurrect the dead. In fact, some aristocrats grew so obsessed with high-quality Chinese bricks that they commissioned custom stamps featuring Cyrillic characters, Orthodox crosses, or even portraits of Peter the Great. Historians still debate whether these were real or just status symbols burned into the leaf surface for flair. You're in a tavern now, somewhere near Irkutsk. It's loud, smoky, and filled with laughter. A samovar hisses on the stove. The barkeep breaks off a corner of a tea brick with a hatchet, tosses it into a steel pot, and stirs. The smell is deep and leathery, with hints of plum and pine tar. This isn't casual tea. This is winter survival. The Russian aristocracy went absolutely wild for it. Some called brick tea the black gold of the East. And they weren't exaggerating. Bricks were used as currency here, too especially in Siberian towns where rubles were scarce and inflation made metal coinage unstable. One brick might buy a coat, half a brick, a night's lodging, a full, high-quality block, a sleigh, and a donkey. If it brewed strong, it spent strong. Meanwhile, back in China, the government couldn't decide whether to celebrate this demand or clamp down on it. Export taxes soared. Bricks were inspected more rigorously than ever. Some provinces even coated their export bricks with internal markings, making them traceable across borders. Smugglers caught with unregistered tea, not treated kindly. One was forced to drink his entire inventory as punishment. He didn't survive the caffeine crash. And the camels, let's talk about them. These weren't random, dusty animals from a petting zoo. These were the heavy lifters of transcontinental trade, specially bred to endure weeks without water, sleep standing up, and carry up to 600 pounds of brick tea in wind that could freeze a teardrop midair. Each caravan included dozens, sometimes hundreds of these creatures, winding through frozen passes like a slow-moving tea serpent. Quirky note, some camel drivers believed that singing to the bricks kept them from spoiling. Folk songs were composed for long journeys. You sit beside one now, a raspy old man singing a lullaby about black leaves, white snow, red blood, and golden silence. You shiver and sip. Now, the bricks themselves took on new Russian identities. Some were wrapped in fur, others packed in birch bark for winter storage. Entire cellars were converted into tea vaults. And among the elite, a new fashion arose: brick tea parties, where guests were invited to watch a brick being broken and brewed like opening a vintage wine. One noble family passed down a brick from generation to generation, never drinking it, just honoring it. When the revolution came, that brick disappeared. Some say it was buried with the family patriarch. Others claim it's still hidden beneath a floorboard in St. Petersburg, untouched, aging, waiting. Historians still argue whether this Russian-Chinese tea trade was more about culture or capitalism. Some say it built diplomatic bridges. Others call it caffeine-fueled exploitation. Either way, the bricks rolled forward, one hoof step at a time. You end your night at a roadside inn built into the hillside. The tea is hot, the blankets scratchy, and the firewood smells faintly of cedar. Outside, a camel sneezes. You laugh softly. Because here, far from its origins, Chinese tea became Russian wealth, and every brick that made it here intact, fragrant, and ready to brew told a story more lasting than any coin ever minted. You don't hear the gunfire right away. At first, it's the shouting, the clatter of boots on dock planks, and the sharp, unnatural silence that follows. You're in Canton now, modern-day Guangzhou, and it's the 1830s. The air smells like salt, tar, and trouble. Tonight, you're witnessing a moment when tea helped start a war. Yes, really? This isn't a quiet stretch of sleepy tea trails. This is the rising tension between China and the British Empire, a collision of opium, silver, and tea, with brick-shaped consequences. Let's ground you with the mainstream fact: by the early 19th century, Britain's demand for Chinese tea had skyrocketed. Brick tea, loose leaf, green, black. It didn't matter. British households were steeped in the stuff. Afternoon tea became a national ritual. But the trade balance, a nightmare. China wanted silver, Britain wanted tea, and silver was in short supply. So, the British East India Company found another export opium, grown in India, smuggled into China, highly addictive, hugely profitable, and entirely illegal. But the silver flowed, and the tea kept coming. Until it didn't. You're watching a tea shipment now, dozens of crates, including brick tea, being loaded under guard. British merchants argue with Qing officials. Tensions are high. The Chinese demand a halt to the opium trade. The British demand free commerce. And beneath it all, tea is still the prize. The Opium War breaks out in 1839. It's not fought over tea exactly, but tea is why the conflict escalates. Without the demand for Chinese tea, there's no reason for this imbalance. No reason for the British to push back so hard. No reason for so many ships to suddenly appear offshore with cannons and contracts. Historians still debate whether the tea trade was the spark or just the fuel. But ask any trader in these docks, and they'll tell you tea was everything. Silver came and went, but tea was daily life, national identity, liquid necessity. One particularly strange anecdote: a British ship's captain during the war demanded to be buried with a brick of tea after being wounded in battle. His crew honored the request. The brick was wrapped in Union Jack cloth, buried in a makeshift grave beside the Pearl River. Years later, during a renovation project, workers found the remains and the brick was still intact, moldy, but unbrewed. Now you're in a Cantonese tea house, half burned, boarded up on one side from last week's naval shelling. Inside, the owner is still serving tea because that's what people do. Commerce continues. Tea continues. even in chaos. But here's the twist: even as war rages, tea remains a stabilizer. British merchants protect tea shipments even while blockading ports. Chinese smugglers sneak bricks through under cover of night, trading tea for medicine or even messages. In the middle of war, tea is the one thing that crosses both lines. Quirky detail time during the war: some smugglers began stamping bricks with false diplomatic crests, claiming the bricks were royal consulate approved to bypass inspection. One such seal bore a cartoonishly bad lion holding a teacup. It actually worked, twice. The fighting ends in 1842 with the Treaty of Nanking, and the consequences reshape China's economy and sovereignty. Hong Kong is ceded, tariff controls are lost. But trade. Oh, trade explodes. And once again, tea especially, brick tea becomes a flood. In the years that follow, tea production in places like Fujian and Yunnan ramps up to industrial levels. Brick presses expand, storage warehouses double in size, and a new player enters the game: British India tea plantations. Suddenly, China isn't the only major exporter. But out on the frontier Mongolia, Tibet, Siberia, brick tea still reigns. Not Darjeeling, not Ceylon. The demand for compressed, dark, strong tea is as high as ever. Only now, the routes are quieter, more efficient, overseen by new customs regulations born from war treaties no one in the steppe has ever read. You pass a border post, where a guard casually asks if your brick was pre-war or post-war vintage. You blink, he grins. The old ones brew better, he says, and waves you through. Meanwhile, smugglers have adapted again. They're hiding silver coins inside hollow bricks, using tea to smuggle money instead of the other way around. The irony is sharp. You sip from your tin cup and smile despite yourself. And here's a callback. Remember the fake dragon bloom seal from earlier? You find another one stamped on a brick wrapped in silk, nestled inside a diplomat's travel case. It was given as a peace offering, a joke, or maybe a reminder that even in war, tea has its own diplomacy. Back in the city, the tea markets roar again. Traders argue over pu-erh vintages. Porters haul crates down the Pearl River. And in a private home, a father hands his son a tea brick, the brick, aged for over 30 years. One day, he says, when the world is calm again, brew this. You walk away slowly, the scent of fermentation and history trailing behind. Because in the end, the guns quiet, the flags change, the treaties get signed, but the tea always boils. You're standing in a quiet farmhouse now, far from cities, docks, and cannons. The world feels slower here, softer, the kind of place where a teapot simmers all day and no one rushes the pour. And tonight, you're watching the slow, inevitable fade of tea bricks as currency and their gentle transformation into something more sentimental than spendable. It's the early 20th century. China is shifting, dynasties have fallen, republics are rising, and the hum of industrialization is rolling in like low thunder. Steamships carry loose-leaf tea in bulk. Paper money is flooding the markets. And yet, out here in the hills of Yunnan, Gansu, and the Tibetan borderlands, people are still quietly bartering with tea bricks like nothing ever changed. Your mainstream history note: the use of tea bricks as functional currency didn't vanish overnight. In rural western China, Mongolia, and parts of Tibet, brick tea remained in daily circulation well into the 1930s and even the 1950s in some places. Why? Because old habits die hard, especially when they work. You're watching an exchange now, an elderly Tibetan woman trading 2 tea bricks for hand-woven cloth. She doesn't count the value. She feels the weight, sniffs the bricks, then nods. Deal done. No receipt. No fuss. But things are changing. Factories in cities like Kunming and Chengdu are switching from brick molds to foil packs and paper boxes. Trains are replacing mule trains. Paper yuan is gaining trust, even in villages where trust is usually reserved for people you've shared soup with. Still, Brick tea hangs on like a faithful old coat with worn elbows but perfect memories. You visit a village where the elders insist on boiling only aged bricks, the ones wrapped in wax paper from 30 winters ago. They claim the new ones are too soft, too rushed. They don't taste like silence anymore, one man says. You nod, even if you're not sure what that means. Now, a quirky footnote. Some local banks actually accepted tea bricks as collateral for loans during this transitional period. You'd bring your bricks, they'd weigh and grade them, and issue a paper note in return. If you didn't repay the loan, they sold your tea at market. Imagine defaulting on a mortgage and losing your grandmother's brick stash. Meanwhile, war brews again this time, not over opium, but over borders and ideologies. The Japanese invasion disrupts trade, communist forces rise, and with every upheaval, the infrastructure of tea as money buckles just a little more. Factories are seized, smuggling routes vanish, entire caravans disappear. And yet, in one mountain monastery, monks continue pressing tea bricks using wooden molds older than the Republic itself. You sit in their kitchen, warm and quiet, as one breaks a brick with a soft tap and drops it into a clay pot. The tea steeps slowly, the color deepens, and the silence feels like reverence. Historians still debate when the last brick was used as formal currency. Some say the 1930s, others claim the 1960s in rural Tibet. A few argue there's still an underground barter system today, especially among older herders who don't trust banks, satellites, or anything that doesn't float in boiling water. You pass through a nomadic camp where a young girl is taught to carve her family's mark into a tea brick, not for trade, but as a keepsake, a relic. Her father tells her it's for her dowry, just in case. He whispers, "Bricks are slow, but they never lie." You smile, holding your own small square of aged pu-erh wrapped in cotton cloth. You won't spend it, but you'll carry it. Here's a final quirky tidbit for the road in the 1980s. A collector found a forgotten cache of tea bricks in an abandoned border post. Among them was a note scribbled in pencil, wrapped around a brick. "If this brews well, I forgive you." No signature, just a hint of apology, buried in leaves and time. Back in town, brick tea becomes nostalgia. Artisans begin recreating antique-style bricks for collectors. Museums curate them. Tea houses offer historical infusions, brewed with bricks aged longer than the teapots they were poured into. And somewhere perhaps in a quiet drawer or a dusty shelf, a single brick sits untouched, its corners chipped, its fragrance faint, waiting for a moment that may never come. You realize now that tea bricks were never just currency. They were trust, memory, resilience, a way to carry warmth through cold economies, and a whisper of flavor when words fell short. The world has moved on, sure, but in certain corners, tea still holds its shape. You've come a long way across dynasties and deserts, from yaks to camels to cargo ships, and now, as your journey winds down, you're standing inside a modern museum, cool air humming softly, polished glass cases glowing beneath spotlights. In front of you, a brick, just one, dull brown, pressed firm, edges slightly cracked, a lump of tea quiet, unassuming, and yet pulsing with centuries of currency, culture, and survival. This is where the story ends, or at least, where it rests. Welcome to the final chapter in the long, slow history of tea bricks as currency. The brick in the case might not look like much, but you know better. You've seen its value, smelled its worth, traded it for warmth, food, and safety. Tonight, we sip not from a pot, but from memory. Mainstream fact in the 21st century, tea bricks are no longer functional currency. They're artifacts, display pieces, occasionally, luxury collectibles. Museums across China, Russia, and beyond now preserve them as symbols of a trade system that once stretched from Beijing to the Baltic. A brick that could once buy a coat now sits behind glass priceless not in value, but in story. You're wandering now between exhibits. One display outlines the journey of a 200-year-old Tibetan trade brick, complete with yak saddle indentations and a faint scent of smoked butter. Another offers a smell box, where you can lift a lid and inhale the musty perfume of aged leaves. You do it, and for a moment, you're back in a windswept camp, clutching a chipped mug. Quirky museum feature. A digital exhibit lets you build your own tea brick, choosing leaf types, mold shapes, and stamp designs. You go for the classic rectangle, add a Tang Dynasty seal, and name your blend Sleepy Fortune. 10 seconds later, a 3D image spins slowly, eternally unbrewed. Now here's the emotional shift. Tea bricks are not just preserved in glass, they're revived in cups. Across China, tea houses have brought back traditional brewing methods for aged bricks. You step into one such place in Chengdu, dim lighting, sandalwood in the air, servers in linen robes. They bring out a brick, not a collectible, but a real, functional slab of pressed tea. With care, they break off a corner, rinse it, steep it. The brew is deep amber, thick, with earthy tones. You sip, and there it is. The past, in liquid form. One server explains that this tea came from leaves pressed 40 years ago, buried in a village cellar during a snowstorm. It brewed better after hardship, he says. You believe him. Elsewhere, collectors trade bricks like rare stamps. Some date back to the Tang Dynasty, others are post-war. A few are fakes, yes. Even now, people forge them. One modern scam artist made bricks from blackened cabbage leaves and shoe polish. His downfall. The tea tasted like regret and salad dressing. In Tibet, a few monasteries still produce bricks using traditional methods not for sale, but for ritual. You're lucky enough to witness one ceremony monks breaking a brick, chanting softly as the tea boils over an open flame. Each cup poured in silence, each sip honoring something bigger than money. You start noticing how many people keep one brick at home, tucked on a bookshelf, wrapped in cloth, given as wedding gifts, or passed down through generations. It's not for drinking, one elderly man says, touching a dusty old slab. It's for remembering. You nod. Historians still debate what truly ended the age of tea as currency industrialization, railroads, the rise of paper notes. Perhaps it was just time. A world growing faster, louder, more complex. Tea bricks were too slow, too quiet, but that doesn't mean they vanished. They migrated from pocket to pantry, from ledger to legend. One last quirky tidbit: in 2015, a small cafe in Moscow launched a tea brick exchange where customers could pay with authentic bricks from family heirlooms. They ran it for 1 year. In that time, they collected over 90 bricks each with a handwritten story, sealed and shelved like currency from a world that forgot how to rush. You're back in the museum now. One final exhibit, a recreation of an old caravan trail, complete with a weathered pack mule and crates marked with inked stamps. In the corner, a bench and a kettle. Visitors are encouraged to sit, sip, and reflect. You take a seat. The tea is strong, smoky, and unfamiliar, yet entirely comforting. It tastes like dust and history, like something boiled in quiet for a long, long time. And as you sit there, you realize tea bricks weren't just about trade. They were about connection, geography, faith, the slow belief that something humble could hold value, not just once, but again and again. They say currency is what people trust. For generations, people trusted tea. And in the end, they were right. Now the fire is low, the cups are empty, and the bricks, those firm, silent squares of history, have done their job. You lie back gently, imagining a caravan winding along a narrow ridge, its camels swaying under loads of dark tea, snow melting in sun patches beneath their feet. Each brick creaks in its leather wrap. Each trader hums a half-forgotten tune. The road is long, but the weight is familiar. Breathe in, the scent of aged leaves lingers faintly, earthy, faintly smoky, honest. Maybe you're picturing an old tea house now, one with uneven floorboards, steam curling beneath a wood beam, and a brick on the shelf that no one has dared brew in 20 years. Or maybe you're just watching the steam fade in your own kitchen, wondering how something so small, so quiet, ever moved armies, fed families, warmed fingers in the cold. Because it did. Tea bricks weren't just currency, they were memory, ritual, comfort compressed. And maybe that's what matters most in the end, not that they bought horses or warmed emperors' bellies, but that they made people pause, sit, sip, wait for the kettle to sing. Let the noise of history fade behind you. Let your breath slow like water coming off the boil. There's no more trade tonight, no more borders to cross, no more stamps to check or roads to follow. Just you, the stillness, and a little warmth left in the cup. Sleep well, traveler, you've earned your rest. Thank you for staying all the way to the end. If you'd like the next journey to explore another forgotten currency, strange trade route, or quietly revolutionary invention, just say the word. I'm here. Kettle on, bricks stacked. Until then, sleep easy, brew slow, dream deep.